After a tough loss in overtime, the Winnipeg Jets are looking for revenge against the Toronto Maple Leafs. And guess what? Reinforcements are coming. We'll dive into all of that and what to expect in round two's matchup on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more, because right now new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 bet guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more and get started. Like I said on tonight's episode, let's talk about the Jets versus Toronto. After a tough overtime loss the other night, Winnipeg was down a couple of key weapons, Vilardi, Scheifele, and then halfway through the game, Josh Morrissey. It went to overtime, and Winnipeg fell after Neil Pionk unfortunately made a very bad decision. Nick Robertson intercepted the pass, and like that, the game was over. So the Jets this time are coming with a little bit more of, I would say, some help, right? We're finally getting a couple of players back. I think the Jets are going to be aggressive. They were really aggressive in the first game, but they really couldn't finish. And I think that was kind of the theme of the evening. Both teams had good chances to score. The goalies stopped all, pretty much everything that they could face. And, the Jets were definitely down some key players. If Morrissey had been in that game for the whole evening, the outcome might have been a little bit different. But I feel like, the general theme of the Jets struggling to finish opportunities, that probably wasn't going to change a lot. Now, though, the Jets are getting, hopefully, Gabriel Vilardi and Josh Morrissey back. Mark Scheifele is apparently not going to play tomorrow, so that's a little bit of a disappointment. I was hoping that he would be well enough to come back in. I think we've all sort of seen that, this team without him is really not quite having a fun time. Let's be honest. Scheifele, I think, really balances the center depth, and this is kind of a point that I made earlier. Is like, look, the Jets have plenty of centers, but whether they are of capable offensive quality, that has kind of been a little bit of a debatable situation. So Scheifele, hopefully after the All-Star break, will be back and better than ever. I am a little concerned that he's been out for so long. I was expecting him to return this game, and to not have him play against Toronto either game is kind of shocking. It must mean that he really isn't doing that well and that he really needs the time off. So whatever's ailing him, I just hope that this is kind of it, because this team really can't go much further without him. They definitely need a healthy Scheifele. Mark coming back would be a blessing. And I think at this point we're seeing, some big needs for the Jets when it comes to help down the middle, which is kind of why Casey Middlestat is really intriguing. I think that he makes a lot of sense for Winnipeg. Elias Lindholm, I don't know what the whole situation with him is. Maybe his lack of scoring over the past 25 games is going to reduce his price tag. I really couldn't tell you, but all I know is that the Jets, for all intents and purposes, are really just hanging on until Mark comes back, and then hopefully, after the All-Star break, the Jets are finally going to have a fully healthy lineup. It's been several months since we've really seen pretty much all of the big guns all together at the same time. I'm hoping that that's going to be, a nice return after the break, but, health is always a funny thing. Maybe the Jets aren't quite 100% there, but let's hope that's not the case. So, for the Jets, I think the biggest thing in this game is to really continue with the same approach that they had in the last game. Come out fast, come out swinging, and put Samsonov or whoever's going to be in net under pressure immediately. The Jets are hopefully going to have more finishing talent this time to actually capitalize on opportunities. I think Winnipeg again, had the right approach, had the right mindset, and just kind of got a little bit unlucky that Samsonov apparently decided to stonewall them. That was a little bit of a shock. He's really not been good this year, so the fact that he was able to really frustrate the Jets is pretty wild. But Morrissey coming back is obviously a huge blessing. Josh is one of our most important puck movers, and without him, you can kind of tell that the deep pairs, much like the center depth without Scheifele, really got shuffled in a way that I don't think was super ideal. Going from Morrissey to Pionk on your first pairing is a pretty big difference. And, Pionk really tried his best and really tried to carry that offensive burden as much as possible. But I think we really saw that he just wasn't quite up to the task. And like I said, he really did his best, but you could tell, like with the turnovers, the number of mistakes that he made, and the fact that, on the evening, he might have been one of our worst defenders. It just wasn't the role that really suited him. And Toronto, unfortunately, took advantage of one of the mistakes that he did make. It's tough, right? You suddenly get thrust back into the 1D role, and it's just not one that I think he was really prepared for, and it doesn't really suit him. So hopefully, once Morrissey is back, the pairs are balanced. Pionk gets back into the role that really makes the most sense for him, and he can kind of go back to doing what he does with Dylan, which, for the most part this year has been pretty solid. So, the Jets, like I said, the overtime loss, it did suck. It was kind of a little bit of a heartbreaker, but, Winnipeg has always had this mindset of getting right back on the horse, getting back to what makes this team effective, and hopefully the Jets will be back in better in this second game. I'm really thinking Winnipeg is going to have a much better outing. We've already seen them beat some of the best teams in the league this year. Toronto is not one of those teams. So for the Jets, this really should be a nice home game, and hopefully one last hurrah before the break where the Jets can rest up and get healthy. Now, over the last few weeks, we've seen some really interesting trade rumors and stuff surrounding the Jets, but one of them that really doesn't make sense that kind of came out of nowhere a couple of days ago was somebody, I think, from Sportsnet suggesting the Jets should maybe consider shopping Laurent Brossoit. We'll talk about why that really doesn't make any sense and why the Jets are better off just keeping Brossoit in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I did have a couple of advertisers and friends from across the network that we wanted to shout out. Our first one is, of course, Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors. And of course, they have a great search engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. It helps you ditch the busy work and, of course, allows you to schedule, screen, and message all in one place and lets you connect with candidates faster. And of course, they're not just about speed and efficiency. They want to give you the highest quality matches possible. Of course, for me, as somebody who's actually used Indeed, as somebody looking for work, I can personally attest to how convenient it was. There was a great way to upload your documents, all of the necessary work experience fields and stuff. Again, it was super easy, very structured, and it made applying for jobs, multiple positions at a time, super easy. And so, if you want to join over 3.5 million businesses worldwide that are using Indeed, it's a great platform, and I imagine for any employer out there, one of the most convenient and simple platforms you could possibly use. Very powerful, very fast and effective. And of course, we have a special offer for those who listen to our network. If you could have a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on Locked On Winnipeg Jets. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions to apply. You need to hire, you need Indeed. I just wanted to shout out our friends and partners at FanDuel. The NFL regular season is finished, and of course the playoffs are still rolling, but there's still time to get on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in guaranteed in bonus bets, win or lose. For those of you who root for teams that maybe got eliminated before they even made the playoffs or just got eliminated over the last week or two, this is a great opportunity for you to at least recoup on some of your losses, some of the pain, and get back into a winning mindset. Of course, with FanDuel, their app is super easy to use, and there are so many different ways to use their platform for awesome bets like same-game parlays. They've got brand new Explore tabs to allow you to find the latest and hottest bets. You can have a great time with the Parlay Hub, which will allow you to find the most popular parlays so that you can get into the winning mindset. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon right now and make your first bet a chip shot extra point. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are talking about some fun stuff around the Jets, some recent rumors, some recent discussion points, and one of those, of course, has been trades because obviously the Jets are this year in a prime position to make an acquisition or two. But somebody has been talking about perhaps the departure of a player like Laurent Brossoit. Now, why on earth would we ever consider that? We'll talk about that in just a moment. Before we go any further, though, I wanted to shout out something really cool the Locked On Network is doing. We have launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with our local experts and international shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Now, like I said, Sportsnet, I believe, or at least one of the major networks, a very similar one, was discussing the Jets perhaps shopping Laurent Brossoit. This was just speculation, though, right? And for me, I thought this was crazy. I think the intimation was more that the Jets should consider perhaps trading Brossoit because of the weakened goalie market. And that, for me, is pretty crazy, right? Winnipeg really has no need to move one of its goalies. For one, moving Brossoit is not going to yield a great return. We don't ever really see goalies get that much. Think back to the offseason, right? This is obviously going to be a little bit different now if we were to revisit it. If teams out there knew what they knew about how the season was going to go, maybe the whole Hellebuyck trade market would have been turned on its head. But right, at the time in the offseason, Helly could not get a single landing spot that the Jets got anywhere near his value in trade package, and he didn't really seem to be getting much in the way of cash offers either. The fact that Hellebuyck signed an 8.5 by 8 year deal, I think really speaks to the fact that teams perhaps underestimated how important he would be and how valuable he would be. Maybe they knew that he'd be a great goalie, but perhaps they thought their own goalies were at least going to be competent. But we've seen this year that that's not really been the case. Most teams, with elite starters, have seen them all nosedive. I think the league average save percentage is like 9-10 at best, maybe a little bit less. And we're talking some of the top starters like Shesterkin. I think Sorokin's had a rough patch recently. Saros has really struggled. Vasilevsky hasn't been himself. A lot of goalies this year, a lot of really traditionally good ones, not posting the best numbers. And yet here's Hellebuyck with like a 925 this season. So you can tell that Helly has kind of been an absolute stud. But behind him, Brossoit has actually been almost just about as good, right? And both had a rough start to the season, but Helly has been carrying the bulk of the load while Brossoit in his limited games has been astoundingly good. And, you see this elite goaltending tandem. This is very similar to what the Bruins have in Ullmark and Swayman, although I would say in this case, right, it's not like a 1A, 1B. It's like a very much Hellebuyck's net plus a really, really, really quality backup. But the Jets, if they were to try and trade Brossoit, they're just not going to get a return that makes enough of a difference to make trading him worth it. I think the most important thing that you have with Brossoit is somebody that you can trust to rest Hellebuyck. And I think especially towards the back stretch of the season, that's going to be critical, right? In past years, we've really seen the Jets lean so heavily on Helly that come playoff time, he hasn't had enough rest and he usually gets worn out pretty quickly. Against teams like Vegas and stuff, I feel like we didn't see him have his sharpest series in past years. I just think, having somebody who can spell him, towards the back half of the end of the stretch to let him get rested up for the playoffs, to give him some time off and let him recuperate before what would hopefully be a deep playoff run, I think is so much more valuable than any sort of futures or trade assets that the Jets could get. And the intimation and sort of the suggestion was to use him to upgrade other parts of the team. But again, if you're going to kind of kneecap yourself in net and suddenly find yourself with a backup who's really not capable of eating more than like 10 starts, why do that? For me, having that elite second goalie is so much more valuable than maybe upgrading your third line. Because for one thing, look, the Jets are probably going to get Rucker McGroarty into this lineup at the end of the season. I really do feel like that's kind of on the horizon. And the Jets have so many futures and assets that they could trade for another skater of some sort anyways. So to me, there's just no real need to go out of your way to try and move one of your most important pieces in net for a player who can upgrade elsewhere when you already have the parts to make that happen externally. So for me, don't trade Brossoit. You're not going to find a backup that's really going to do the same level of work. And honestly, the Jets can just upgrade the roster elsewhere. If anything, the Jets would probably want to move either one of their defenders or one of their bottom six forwards instead to make room for another player. And of course, we've talked about it in the past. Maybe somebody like Appleton or Iafallo, obviously Logan Stanley, maybe even Chisholm at some point, or Schmidt. I mean, there's a lot of guys that the Jets might have to consider letting go. And, hopefully Winnipeg can bring in some really talented finishers and stuff to give this team the best chance at a deep playoff run. But one of the guys that's recently hit the trade market that could be what you would call an upgrade, and certainly somebody that Winnipeg fans are very familiar with, is Patrik Laine. Could he return? I know we've talked about it in the past. It wasn't really a thought back then, but now that he's openly being shopped, maybe the Jets have a chance at taking a run at him, and maybe it might even make some sense. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I just wanted to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your vehicle alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one car, you'll find exactly what you're looking for, and with eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure the part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. With eBay, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your vehicle into the MVP and bring home the victory. Keep your car alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay's guaranteed fit is only available to U.S. customers. Hello, friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us as we are talking about a name that a lot of Jets fans have some fondness for. Obviously, not everyone, I think, loves this particular player the way that I think a number of us do. And I respect that. I think, the way that Patrik Laine left the Jets a couple of years ago was perhaps not on the best of terms. But you know what they say, time sometimes softens hearts and makes people rethink things. And I think Laine has kind of seen, how rough things can be with, say, another organization like Columbus. When the trade happened, obviously, I don't think any of us ever foresaw what would come out of it for the Dubois side of things, turning into the whole LA trade and the Jets, suddenly being turned around this season into a true juggernaut. But Laine, for his part, has kind of been, a bit up and down for Columbus. He's been asked to do a lot of things that I would think I would never have expected him to do, like play as a center again. And, when you look at some of his underlying numbers over the past couple of years, last year he was actually really good, both defensively and offensively. He had a huge impact on the shooting percentage of his line and also generally limited chances against. He was very helpful in transition, though he's not the most fleet-of-foot skater. And, of course, he was still finishing opportunities, shooting like between 12 and 14%. But then injuries, of course, really sidelined things. He had a broken clavicle, I think, this year, thanks to a slew foot. So things this season have really taken a turn for the worse. He's really posting rock-bottom numbers compared to his usual scoring rates. And it's been a brutal, brutal year. And when you think about how bad the Blue Jackets have been, it makes a lot of sense. I've seen people say, well, Pascal Vincent knows what's going on. He was an insider here with the Jets. He knows his attitude, and he doesn't even want him. Why should we want him back? And I think to really trust, an organization that has proven it has no idea how to win, for me, is sort of putting faith in the wrong folks, right? look, I'm not going to sit here and say that, the Jets have been perfect. Winnipeg has made plenty of mistakes itself, but you know what? Seeing Jarmo Kekalainen and Pascal Vincent really run the Blue Jackets into the ground the past year or so, and especially with the way that they've handled some of their really young talent, like David Jiricek, for me, I wonder if getting Laine out of there and putting him in a much more supportive environment would reveal the side of him that really was exciting to watch and super fun. So how likely is it that the Jets could acquire Patrik Laine? Well, without significant salary retained, almost impossible. The Jets would have to move a lot of money out, and I just don't know that there's a desire to do that, especially with, Laine having another couple years on his contract. You'd probably have to ask Columbus to eat like 2 to 3 million. And I just don't know that they would really want to do that. They don't have, a lot of flexibility anyways, but assuming that the Blue Jackets would be willing to be talked into it, I would say like 2.5 to 3 million would suddenly make a lot of sense, right? Laine at 5.7 for like 2 to 3 years, or even like 6.5 would be a lot more palatable. And I think you could actually make a couple of pieces move to have this happen. You could send Columbus some futures. And I think, in terms of what Laine would bring to this lineup, if you're looking for like an elite finisher who can not only fix your power play, but also provide an elite shooting threat for your top nine elsewhere in the lineup, you're really not going to find many better shooters than Laine. No one has figured him out yet. Look, the Blue Jackets, I think, are just a very bad team. So you can look at it as depressed goal totals and make all of the narratives you want. But I can tell you, I don't think it's quite as, true as you might imagine it to be. I think if he comes to the Jets, he's going to start posting like 35 or 40 goal seasons again. Winnipeg is a much better place to find scoring opportunities and to take advantage of the elite finishing talent that's already here. He's going to be fed by like Mark Scheifele, Vlad Nemesnikov, Perfetti, Ehlers, all of these guys who are great players and much more talented than some of the roster players that he's been playing with recently. For me, I just feel like this is a much better environment. And with Wheeler gone, the vibes are different. Bonus might be, a little bit different in his approach with Laine 2 versus how Paul Maurice was. I just feel like in terms of where these two parties are at in their timelines, it's just a lot different than when Laine left. And I think Winnipeg could actually come out on the winning side because obviously, Laine is kind of an expensive asset, and the Blue Jackets are probably eager to get out of that contract. You might actually be able to kind of swindle them into something that they end up regretting in a few years with the right sort of retention and trade assets. So I think the Jets should consider it. I don't think it's likely, and I don't think it's really possible, but I think I would consider it all the same, especially because this year's trade market doesn't look great for high-end finishing assets. There's not many players who are going to bring Laine's elite release and skill sets. I just don't really see that many guys out there who could do it. And if you use Laine's last season as more of a measuring stick, Patrik was really good last year. I mean, he was almost like a point per game. And I think compared to a lot of the other players out there that the Jets could trade for, there's just not many that are his caliber of finisher and creative force, right? He had 52 points in 55 games. The season before, he was a point per game. I really feel like there's still something there. And if his feelings and thoughts have changed with how, he left versus his return, I think this fan base would honestly embrace him a lot more than they would reject him. It'd kind of be like your prodigal son returning after a long absence away. And maybe absence makes the heart grow fonder. I don't know. All I know is, like, compared to a lot of the other players that the Jets could trade for, you're just not going to get somebody who, A, fits Winnipeg's timeline, B, is familiar with the team and city, and C, Jets fans would basically welcome with open arms if he does what he does best. If anyone, is one of those players that you could say, I could fix him and honestly really mean it, I think Laine is probably one of those guys that makes the most sense for a salvage case like this. But I don't know. Obviously, I have a lot of reservations about it. I think his health is definitely of concern, whether it's luck or his body failing him. I don't know. And with the contract being the way that it is and still being pretty expensive with term, obviously, if things go really south, the Jets have a massive anchor on the roster that they can't do anything with. But sometimes, if you really want to swing for the fences and go for broke, you've got to be willing to take the risk. And I think Laine is one of the few players where I would almost feel irrationally comfortable with taking that swing and trying for it to see what happens. But let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm sure you're all going to say that's crazy. No way. He made his choice. Let's be done with it. But maybe you have a change of heart and think about it a little more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thanks so much for listening and making us your first listen of the day every day. Stay tuned this weekend for an episode recapping Winnipeg's performance against Toronto. I am hoping to report on a big victory. But like I said, that is all the time that we have for tonight. As always, have a great night. Go Jets, go, and see you tomorrow.